Big oil executives testified before House lawmakers Thursday about their alleged role in spreading disinformation on climate change. While some of the oil executives spoke freely about climate change, both Chevron and Exxon CEO denied any role in spreading disinformation. CBS News' Skylar Henry has more.
I'm just asking an open question. It's not a gotcha question.
Democrats on Capitol Hill wanted clear testimony from oil executives of ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP America, and Shell.
For far too long, big oil has escaped accountability for its central role in bringing our planet to the brink of a climate catastrophe. That ends today.
But lawmakers said they didn't get the answers they wanted, much like at the big tobacco legislative hearing in the 90s.
I was hoping that you would not be like the tobacco industry was and lie about this.
Oil execs did talk freely about climate change and its effects.
As early as 1991, our annual reports discussed concerns about climate change.
ExxonMobil has long recognized that climate change is real and poses serious risks.
Did we join some of these shadow groups to work against some of the early efforts? Yes.
The hearing follows the release of a video in June that shows former Exxon senior lobbyist Keith McCoy speaking about the company's efforts to fight climate science. But the CEOs of ExxonMobil and Chevron both say their companies have not engaged in disinformation campaigns.
Any suggestion that Chevron is engaged in an effort to spread disinformation and mislead the public on these complex issues is simply wrong.
It is absolutely disgusting.
Republicans criticize Democrats' questions and the validity of the hearing.
The purpose of this hearing is clear: to deliver partisan theater for primetime news.
The oil company executives all pledged today to do their part to combat climate change. Skylar Henry, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
For more on this, let's bring in Harvard University History of Science professor Naomi Oreskes. She is also the author of the book, Why Trust Science? Naomi, thank you for being here. So these oil executives denied spreading disinformation on climate change. What exactly are these companies accused of?
Well, I wouldn't use the word accuse. This wasn't a criminal proceeding today, but we know from my own research, the work of other academics and investigative journalists, that for more than 30 years now, the fossil fuel industry has promoted disinformation, half-truths, and in some cases, outright falsehoods about climate science in order to confuse the American people and undermine support for climate action. And so the real question now is, they're asking to be viewed as trustworthy partners going forward in addressing the climate crisis. And the question is, have they really changed their stripes? Can we consider they're trustworthy? Or does their history still linger over them?
Well, and on that front, lawmakers said that oil executives did not give them the answers that they were looking for. And as we heard, some Republicans even questioned the validity of the hearing. Why is it so crucial for Democrats to hear big oil admit to playing a central role in climate change? And do we think that the two sides can actually coexist and work together on this?
Well, I think it's crucial for the American people. The American people have the right to good information, because in a democracy, we can't make good decisions if we don't have good information. And if we're subject to a bombardment of disinformation and propaganda, it makes it extremely difficult for us to understand even what kinds of policies could be effective. And we saw that today with a lot of tap dancing by the fossil fuel executives about low carbon and reduced carbon and carbon intensity, none of which is a meaningful solution to the climate crisis.
Yeah, during the hearing, oil executives refused to pledge not to spend money to oppose efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Instead, BP America's CEO, David Lawler, said, quote, "We're pledging to advocate for low-carbon policies that do, in fact, take the company and the world to net zero." Do you believe that promise, if kept, is, in fact, good enough?
No, it's not. It's not enough to have low carbon policies. We need to work towards zero carbon policies. All of the scientific evidence, the IPCC 1.5 degree report says that we have to move in the direction of cutting emissions by about half by 2030, which is very soon now, in part because of fossil fuel funded delay, and really zero out emissions by 2050. It's also really important to note, and I will exempt Shell and BP from this, but all of the American companies here have all have plans to increase oil and gas production in the years to come. And we heard them double down on that today, saying repeatedly how we needed more energy, we needed more fossil fuels. Well, the world does need energy, but the world desperately needs for that energy not to be fossil fuels, which are driving dangerous and damaging climate change, but to see a rapid transmission to a renewable energy economy. And that's what these companies have stood in the way of for 30 years. And what we saw today is that they continue to stand in the way of that.
Well, what actions can Congress take to try and hold these companies accountable and change their approach to climate change when their entire industry has been built on oil? How much can Congress do to actually make that built on something else?
Well, there's a lot that Congress can do by changing the financial incentives. The two most effective things that I think experts agree on that Congress could do tomorrow is to eliminate subsidies for fossil fuels and put a stiff price on carbon. The fossil fuel industry is heavily subsidized. That's something that we heard outright falsehoods about today from the industry executives. Independent sources estimate that direct subsidies to fossil fuels in the United States alone are at least $20 billion every year. Globally, those direct subsidies are at least $650 billion, and that does not include the indirect subsidies in terms of the unpaid health costs or the cost of military protection of oil and gas shipping lanes. So the fossil fuel industry is a hugely subsidized industry. And so one thing that Congress could do beginning tomorrow is to phase out those subsidies so that renewable energy and efficiency could compete on a level playing field. And this is something that the industry has opposed over and over again. They say they believe in free enterprise, but it's not true. They actually continue to fight. And even today, they are fighting to continue to maintain those subsidies. The other important thing, which virtually all economists agree on, is that climate change is a market failure. Business as usual has given us this crisis, a crisis that is costing the American people tens of billions of dollars every year in damages that we, the American people, pick up the bill for. The fossil fuel industry makes billions of dollars in profit, and we are left with tens of billions of dollars in damage from floods and fires and hurricanes. So we can fix that. And as I said, virtually all economists agree by putting a price on carbon. But it needs to be a stiff price. 50 cents doesn't do the trick. And if you watch the hearings today, you notice that when the executives who all claim to support a carbon price, when they were asked, well, what carbon price would you support? Not a one gave an answer to that question.
Telling. Professor Naomi Oreskes, thank you very much.
Thank you.